This is the story of the Wampus Cat, which happened not too far from here. Cornelia wasn't beautiful, but she wasn't plain. Some say she might have been a real looker if she weren't just so sad. She spent her childhood playing in the woods, talking to animals and picking plants. The child had an uncanny ability to know which plants healed and which plants harmed. She could collect animals, and she always knew what they were thinking. And this scared her parents. They knew people would say she was a bit off, a bit odd. The child was a witch. Fearing she would be shunned by the neighboring townfolk, they spent a great deal of time pulling her away from the woods. They blamed the forest, fearing it had enchanted and bewitched their daughter. To Cornelia's dismay, her parents married her off as soon as they could. Her husband Ben wasn't handsome, and he wasn't plain. He was plain old ugly. He owned a small farm in the valley, over by where the creek splits, just by the crooked oak tree. You might have been there before. He grew mostly corn, some wheat, and turnips. He could provide for Cornelia and give her a modest life, and most importantly, he could keep her away from those darn woods. What her parents failed to realize was, for Cornelia, any forest would do, any animal would do, and any plant. Ben assumed he was getting a good deal, a woman to take care of him, mind him, but to Ben's horror, he had married, and in his words, a witch. As long as Cornelia had dirt under her feet, trees above her head, and animals to speak with, she continued with her ways. Ben didn't like it one bit. He cursed his in-laws for tricking him into marrying, in his words, a dang witch. Cornelia knew plants better than anyone in those hills, and Ben would swear she would intentionally make him sick with her meals. That, in his words, witch is putting poison in my stew. Ben had a habit of gobbling his meals a little too fast, which might contribute to an uneasy belly. But maybe Cornelia tossed a couple jack-o'-lantern mushrooms in his soup. Who can say? Ben was tired of it. He decided that he could make his woman act right and bend her to his will. First thing I will do is I will drive off all those animals in the woods. So he bought the meanest dogs you could ever find. Some would say they were part wolf, and others say he stole them from the devil himself. But let me tell you, Cornelia had those hounds wrapped around her finger in a week. Those dogs barked, snarled, and growled at Ben anytime he left the house. In a month, the dogs chased Ben around the farm and tore a hole in his britches. He had to climb the oak tree to escape, and while he was in that tree, an angry rooster pecked his head. He was so fed up, he released those dogs into the woods and said, "Good riddance. I'll never own a dog again," he spat and stomped back to the house. Cornelia became so lonely and sad, she had no one to talk to. She was forbidden to go into the forest. Ben kept her busy all day, cooking his meals, cleaning his cabin, and washing his clothes. Cornelia would finish her work every day, and late at night she would wail and cry. Her sobs would carry into the woods, drift down into the town where people began to talk. Ben became uncomfortable with the gossip and rumors. Everyone was trying to figure out the mystery of the wailing woman. He didn't want the townfolk to figure out he was married to, in his words, a witch. One day in early autumn, he asked Cornelia if she would like to go into the woods on a walk and pick some of those good mushrooms for tonight's stew. Elated, she quickly stepped into her shoes, snatched up a basket, and ran out the door. It had been a good long time since Cornelia went into the woods, and she took her time exploring. She picked up leaves, she tossed acorns, collected some pretty rocks, she even took her shoes off to feel the earth under her feet. She walked a ways up the stream, where the trees were so thick the sunlight scarcely reached the forest floor. She marveled at how it felt like nighttime under the canopy of trees. The branches reached out over the stream, making everything feel otherworldly, like the trees were made of magic. And a small ray of light glinted off of a stone in the water, and it caught Cornelia's eye. Drawn to it, she went to collect the stone, only to discover it was not a rock. She gently tugged on it as the silt and sand of the stream bottom released the object. In her hands, she held a mask with a feline face. She stared at the mask and wondered, from where did it come? A big grin spread across her face. This was the first grin since those dogs bit Ben in the rear. She put the mask up to her face, and she thoughtfully tied the ribbon behind her head. She felt so free. She spun, she danced, she sang. Cornelia splashed in the stream. She kicked up leaves, never tiring. Then she took off running through the trees as fast as she could, feeling more alive than she had ever felt before. She climbed up a big tree and sat high on the branches, looking out over the forest, off to the mountains and down to Ben's farm. She let out a hiss. Startled by that sound, she put her hand up to cover her mouth, but instead of a hand, she saw a paw, and she realized she no longer had 2 arms. Instead, she had 4 furry legs and 4 big paws. She scampered down the tree and returned to the stream, where she puzzled at her reflection. Cornelia saw 2 glowing yellow eyes, 2 big pointy tufted ears, and a mouth full of fangs and long whiskers. Gone was her human face. Feeling quite pleased with herself, she picked up the basket of mushrooms in her sharp mouth and pranced back to the farm, where she strode right up to the cabin's door and scratched her long claws along the wood of the door. When Ben answered, he was confused to see a smiling bobcat with glowing yellow eyes and a basket full of mushrooms. The cat let out a horrible scream that Ben felt in his bones all the way down to his toes. Ben turned white, and his legs nearly went out from under him. He fumbled trying to shut the door as the cat burst into the cabin, shredding and clawing and tearing anything she could get her claws into. And then she ran out the door and back up into the woods. Every night after, Ben would hear loud wailing coming from the woods that sounded like a woman screaming and crying. The people in the town began to talk about the ghost that looked like a cat that haunted the forest. It sounded like a woman crying. The witch of the woods, they would say. That ain't no witch in the woods, Ben replied. It's just, in his words, my wife.